Hi and welcome. My name is Rob Scott from UC Today News, and in this session, I'm talking to industry thought leader and co-founder and CEO of Theta Lake, Devin Redmond, and he's going to be talking us through his lessons from the trenches of deploying collaboration tools in financial services organizations. Welcome, Devin. How's it going?
It's great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.
Yeah, really good to see you and equally excited for today's conversation. Lots of insights to be had, so stay tuned, everyone. But first of all, Devin, I suppose as the co-founder and CEO of Theta Lake, you've lots of unique insights into the deployment of collaboration tools in financial services. So to kick things off, could you share some of your key observations and lessons you've learned from working with leaders in Fortune 500 banks and that kind of thing on collaboration and security strategy?
Yeah, so it's been a very interesting time to kind of watch the evolution of what was a pretty rapid adoption prior to the pandemic that then turned into, what I would say probably one of the biggest catalysts of change in the communication and information sharing environments that organizations have, because everybody went remote and they needed to use the modern communication tooling infrastructure. They needed to use new collaboration apps that help them create information, share that information. And as organizations went through that metamorphosis to really adopt those new tools, they had to make a lot of considerations or considered changes in terms of how they implemented those tools to ensure data protection, ensure that they were adhering to regulatory compliance rules and even their own internal compliance rules. And that led to a very fast learning curve from organizations. And, I think one of the trends that we've seen and we talk about a lot is, when in doubt, disable things that you're not sure that you can properly govern or capture. And so what's happened over the last little bit is now organizations really trying to carefully consider what they can leverage in the tools that they may have disabled because they were uncertain prior. And so biggest learnings from my perspective in working with our financial services customers is walking through that map of how they can better set up a control infrastructure that allows them to both meet security requirements, which is always ever present, but increasingly get on top of the many compliance scenarios that they have to cover, from record keeping to reconciliation to search and doing things more proactive around supervision and surveillance.
Yeah, good answer. And in your daily interactions with customers, you've witnessed firsthand the challenges and successes in deploying modern collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams. Can you highlight some of the common challenges financial institutions face when adopting such technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you mentioned, we're over 100 customers in financial services. We work with 6 of the top 7 North American banks. Several of those happen to be in the top 5 global banks as well. And so we've seen their usage of tools like Teams as an example, where they very quickly adopted that as a mechanisms to keep their organization and their teams communicating on Teams. But there are so many impressive capabilities that Microsoft has continued to push the envelope on. And I think what most organizations have struggled with is in a world where all of the communication infrastructure is cloud native and it moves at cloud pace, meaning that release cycles are often very short. Updates come within release cycles, new features roll out very, very quickly. And sometimes they can be new features inside of Teams. Sometimes they can be new features inside of M365 that is a whole new communication capability that didn't exist before. And so watching them go through that journey where, one day they have the ability to just send a chat back and forth, and the next day they can federate that chat with third parties. They can start sharing files. They can take that chat and drop an email into it so that you can basically mesh your communication channels, has really challenged their understanding of how quickly communication platforms change, but also how many different things you can do inside of those communication channels that were not possible when you were just maintaining a simple point-to-point, what I'll refer to as kind of the traditional world of point-to-point emails, and I plug a recording line into my direct phone line, even if it is VoIP. All of those things have changed, where now it's all meshed inside of Teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And keeping, end users happy is a major goal for enterprises nowadays, isn't it? And could you dig a little bit deeper on kind of the best practices that you've seen financial services organizations, employ to kind of, ultimately enhance that user satisfaction?
Yeah, and I think this is a critical point, right? Everybody's aware of the massive amounts of fines that have been levied over the last couple of years around unmonitored communications. The reality, and I think there's a very direct correlation if you look at the numbers, is that many organizations in this race to adopt these new tools have hampered the tools themselves in terms of turning off features that they weren't sure they could capture, or didn't have infrastructure, meaning they had heritage or legacy compliance infrastructure that was either meant solely for e-coms or solely for voice and ACOMs or audio communications. And what that meant was, by disabling those features, they actually drove down the engagement of those new tools, right? I think everybody should always recognize that there are many, many users who are always trying to communicate quickly, be effective, leverage the capabilities they have in their communication tools. And when you disable those and make them not work like a modern collaboration tool, you have many people that will do the wrong thing for the right reason to try and get their job done. And that challenge creates more and more usage of unsanctioned tools, whether you call it shadow IT or whether you call it people just communicating outside of the lines just to get their job done. And that signal noise from that really obscures the much smaller percentage of folks that are specifically trying to do things that are inappropriate, right? So the ones that are committing malfeasance now become obscured by the many, many people who are just trying to do the right thing, but they're doing it the wrong way or communicating the wrong way. And so we see a lot of that happen inside of organizations, whether it's disabling emojis and something as simple as that, but there are lots of great articles, including some blogs from us on that topic. Whether it's turning off the ability to federate with external parties, whether it's turning off file sharing, or whether it's turning off video and voice capabilities in a channel like Teams, where that's a huge part of the communication mix that you want to be able to achieve inside of those comms.
So what you're saying is potentially, organizations, financial institutions are locking all these features down. But if we can unlock those features, this is potentially a competitive advantage for financial services organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. So a good percentage of our customers are actually doing this, enabling features and turning things on because it allows their employees to work more effectively, right? So they're more engaged, they're driving more monitored communications, and there's something that I would call the physics of time, right? If you're spending 2 hours a day more inside of Teams or another collaboration platform, that's 2 hours a day less that you're specifically unable to spend time in an unmonitored channel. So you get the benefit of more monitored communications or more compliance while you're doing that. But the most important effect is you're getting more ROI out of the tools that you've probably invested a significant amount in, and those employees are more productive, which gives your organization a competitive advantage over folks that are toggling back and forth between different tools that can't exchange information easily. Imagine that it takes you 2 times as long to do the same thing at institution A versus institution B. That means institution B is necessarily moving faster, but it also means employees at one versus the other are looking at that and saying, that seems like a better place to work. And if you're thinking about the evolution of the workforce, you better be thinking about the tools that they're native in, right? That they want to use and that they want to adopt in that environment, because the most facile users of that will want to go to the organization that has the best tools, and that creates a virtuous cycle of acceleration in their productivity and in that organization's competitive advantage too.
Yeah, absolutely. And not every organization just works office based anymore, right? I mean, hybrid work creates all sorts of complexity, and I suppose if you keep on locking those features down, you're just going to restrict that hybrid work style, aren't you, ultimately? So really interesting. In terms of security, then, let's just touch on the kind of top priorities that organizations, especially financial services, organizations need to think about when deploying these collaboration tools like Teams.
Yeah. So first and foremost, think about the different demographics that you have internally, right? What types of users do you have in financial services? You often have, a subset that are highly regulated. Then you have a next group that interacts with the regulated users. Then you may have folks that sit in back office functions that may be less regulated, but they're probably interacting across your organization. And so you want to think about the right controls across the demographics. You want to anticipate that they may actually communicate with each other. So that's an important aspect of that. Then when you're planning your deployment, whether it's Teams or other tools in the mix, you can think about what features you want to enable for those different demographics, right? Is this group allowed to interact with other people internally? Am I going to allow them to federate, which is something that we've seen quite productively used. In fact, we ourselves are federated with many of our customers, allowing us to do things like directly communicate with the teams that use our platforms at large financial institutions, which is a huge productivity improvement over having to wait for an email and doing the 24-hour loop around that versus being able to have multiple modes of communication and interaction with those customers. So thinking about who you want to allow to have federation, thinking about what features are appropriate for those users to have on or off, and then setting up even more nuanced things, right? Like marking particular records that you have as regulatory records so that you can track those. That's a capability inside of M365 as an example. So having all of that set up. Then the next layer is making sure that you have capture infrastructure that can follow along with that, right? Things that can monitor those communications, make sure that you're capturing them and then retaining them in the different locations that you want to retain them. Maybe you want records to be in Purview. Maybe you want it to be in a traditional archive that you have on premise. Maybe you want voice recordings to go somewhere else. Maybe you want to leverage Theta Lake retention for some of that content. Maybe there's mixed media in it that you need a rich ability to play it. So having a strategy and then knowing that you can reconcile that, right? So that you can look in and say, hey, I captured X number of communication records from Teams or from another communication platform, and then I delivered that to all of these different sources. And I can say that if it's 1,000 here, then it's 1,000 that was delivered into those different locations. And so making sure that you have a strategy for that. And then the next piece that is equally important is not only being able to reconcile it, but then being able to search those communications. And I think this is where many organizations are squarely in that intersection of pain right now, making sure that they've captured them all, but then given the fact that the communications are meshed, the modalities are often combined, right? If I were to ask somebody, what is Teams? If you came from a traditional environment and you were using a legacy archive in your mind, Teams is chat, and it is what is called electronic communications. But if you ask somebody like you and me communicating, Teams is all of it. It's voice, video, chat. I can put emails. I can share files. I can segue into a SharePoint page and have comments going back and forth that then I segue back into my Teams chat conversation and I do a phone call directly out of it. And that whole mesh of those communications, not to mention all the other tools that I could be using around that, whether it's a Zoom phone call or a Zoom video or a Ring Central call or using Asana and whiteboards from folks like Mural, becomes the conversation that you need to be able to search to say, hey, was Devin doing something inappropriate when he was talking with Rob, as an example? And if your environment is set up to only deal with a very finite set of e-coms in your traditional archive, and then your voice recordings in a traditional voice recording infrastructure, you lose all the context and the interplay and the ability to put that together as one conversation. And so that ability to do unified search, to look into the timeline of a team's conversation and see where it segued out to phone calls and other, and be able to actually look at all of those media types in one view, is usually the next thing that folks are very much struggling with in terms of what they need to consider as they're rolling out these tools. And then the last thing is really, once I have that visibility, what types of risks do I want to look for, right? Am I worried about collusion? Am I worried about people sharing material, non-public information on those channels? And if I find it, what's my response to that? Hopefully it's more than just sending an alert to somebody and then that somebody has to then send an email to say, hey, stop, cease and desist, versus if I see some MNPI in a Teams channel and something that is a highly unstructured conversation that isn't a credit card number, but is something that's sensitive, the ability to actually remediate that and have a compliance professional or a risk professional click to remediate and remove that content. So making sure that I've mapped the platform correctly, and the controls and features I want enabled and how I want information handled. Making sure I've got good capture infrastructure around that helps me with reconciliation, specifically knowing that I'm going to have multiple types of communications probably stored in more than one location as well. Being able to search across that meshed communication type and modalities across different tools, and then being able to detect and respond to risks inside of that are really kind of the big buckets for organizations to consider.
Lots to think about. And I'm going to touch on something else that is going to, I suppose, make the conversation even more complex. But with the advent of, AI and Microsoft really leading the charge with Microsoft Copilot. They've now just announced 320 million users on Microsoft Teams, so even more users using Teams. But with the AI baked in there, all these conversations are going to kind of go next level, aren't they, in the future? So it's just kind of keen to understand, how do you see that shaping the year ahead? And what do financial services organizations and maybe leaders need to think about?
Yeah, this is a hot topic, just like you said, with our customers in the market. What are the different use cases to anticipate? I think organizations first need to think about the productivity benefits of using it and making sure they onboard it appropriately with users that have good instruction sets on how they should be interacting with AI, because it certainly has myriad benefits for their organization. Second, they need a strategy for what they're going to capture inside of that. Certainly it's going to generate more communications, and the simple nature of the fact that you are getting content back from a source that has to be validated or disclaimed, as the case may be, right? You may want to say, hey, this content or conversation was joined or generated or summarized by a generative AI assistant like Copilot. And making sure that you can just do some of those basics so that there is a reader, listener, participant beware and kind of tacit acknowledgement on that front. But then there's also tracking what people are asking it, right? What are they trying to do, and getting behavior analysis out of that. So, if you have folks that are asking what is the best way to get the best price on certain aspects of, a transaction or a deal or working with a client, you need to know that, because that's probably a place downstream where you want to take a slightly heightened supervision approach to those conversations. So thinking about all of those, thinking about how you're going to capture and validate that data set is one core aspect of it. And then thinking about how you're also going to drive explainability in your own detections, your own capture of that is another aspect that isn't Gen AI specific, but has been one of the trends in AI and machine learning for the last little bit, right? If the system, and I'm trusting the system to give me insights or to trigger an alert, I need some reasonable understanding of why that happened. How was it constructed? What data set is it operating off of? And so making sure there's a lot of transparency and explainability baked into the solutions that you're using from a compliance perspective is certainly another aspect that organizations need to consider. But generally, I think this is going to be a hot topic that continues to be a hot topic over the next year as organizations figure out different approaches. My guiding advice is first figure out how you're going to capture and disclaim those conversations to make sure that everybody's aware of where and when Gen AI is used, and making sure that you can detect misusage of Gen AI interaction.
Yeah, and I suppose the key point being, don't turn it all off. Don't turn those features off. You do want your users to use these new technologies, don't you? They are truly enablers, aren't they, for productivity?
Certainly. And I think because it is such a gray area, look, expect a mistake, expect a mishap, but it's going to happen whether you deliberately do it or not. And so the more deliberate you are, the more you have visibility and you can course correct should something go awry, et cetera. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about Theta Lake then. Could you share some key takeaways, success stories of financial institutions that have deployed a Theta Lake technology alongside collab tools like Microsoft Teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So I gave a little bit of the demographics of our customer set, but one of the things that has been the most fun in the journey for us is working with customers to help them get the most out of their collaboration infrastructure. And we had many learnings along the way too, right? Our system in the Theta Lake Risk and Compliance Suite is built to do everything from capture and retention to unified search across modalities to what I'd call proactive compliance, where you're doing both supervision and surveillance, but you're actually able to do response, right? So you can deploy Theta Lake for everything that you would want to do in a governance and compliance posture. But what we've found very helpful for our customers is to break that into phases for them to adopt. And one of the reasons we did that is we learned very quickly how fast companies were adopting, and financial services organizations were adopting new communication tools, and how hamstrung they had many of those deployments. And the easiest thing that we could do to help them get value was to help them turn on features, right? So whether you're turning on in-meeting chat and Q&A and polling, or whether you're turning on SMS in your new cloud phone deployment, or whether you're turning on emojis and other modalities inside of your chat, being able to just do that without having to disrupt downstream compliance infrastructure is a huge value add for the organization with a very fast time to value. And I think everybody should always be thinking about what's the fastest time to value for your customer. And so examples for us were a large North American bank that was unable to use a lot of their workstream collaboration tools that had features turned off inside of their meetings. They weren't ready at the time to do full recording of video and audio and surveil that, but they were also unable to use in-meeting chat and Q&A and polling. And so the ability for them over the course of a couple of weeks to test and roll out for over 100,000 users the ability to chat inside of a meeting, and the ability to do things like Q&A and polling, especially when they were interacting with third parties, whether it's a mini webinar or whether it's a town hall, being able to have that functionality was a huge productivity boost. Prior to that, they were in a meeting and users would go outside of that meeting to a third-party tool. Best case scenario, one that the organization had onboarded and was being monitored and captured. Worst case scenario, some of them were going to tools like a WhatsApp and other. Those became unmonitored communications. But even for the ones that were monitored, now you have distraction in the meeting. Folks aren't paying attention here because they're in the screen on the right or the left and they're typing and not engaging in that meeting anymore. And simply just can't ask a simple question like, hey, can you send me that deck after the meeting? Or can we go back a slide or two without interrupting a whole meeting? And so just that ability to very quickly step in and affect user populations of 10, 100,000 users all at once and make them that much more productive was a great experience. And so we've seen scenarios like that. We have one of our financial services customers that is over 200,000 users on Microsoft Teams, where they were not able to turn on in-meeting chat, and they were also struggling to turn on meetings because they wanted to make sure they were doing capture correctly and they were capturing the e-coms and sending it to their existing infrastructure. But B, they also wanted to make sure they were able to record the meetings and do that on a regionalized basis, right? If you can imagine an organization that has that many users, you should note that it's not a bank that is just in North America. They have operations in Europe and other places around the globe, including APAC. And they needed to be able to do localized recording and then make sure that that data stayed in residence, whether that's in Asia Pacific or whether that's in a specific country in Europe. And so being able to solve those types of challenges so that they can deploy Teams audio and video en masse to large user populations around the globe, but meet very specific localized regulatory capture requirements are the types of things that allowed us to move very fast in helping customers with that first part of the value chain, which is how do you take advantage of all the UC tools that you've invested in and do that without disrupting your existing compliance processes, but also by giving you more confidence that you do have things captured and monitored and you can report on it. So that was kind of one of the biggest things that we came out of the last couple of years doing, which is solving those scenarios where yes, the UC tool has been adopted and deployed, but it's not been driven to full engagement potential in the organization. And then usually when we move on from that, it creates that next scenario, which is actually I do have this mesh communication and it does span modalities and oftentimes spans tools, right? Most customers, even the most pervasive M365 Teams, Viva, Engage environment probably has 3 to 4 other communication platforms that they're using for other use cases. Their users are navigating those with ease and moving back and forth across them. Their compliance infrastructure is oftentimes struggling to put those connections together. And so that next part for us of helping with that search perspective has been the big part of the journey over the last year or so of moving customers along that modernity path of, hey, you need to think about search and your visibility into your comms in a different way, and kind of saying, hey, there's concept of unified capture, there's a concept of then unified search, and then once you're there, you're going to see the things that you probably want to be detecting. This type of behavior here looks like collusion. I need to look at collusion, whether it's on video, voice, chat, email, a workstream tool in the comment sections and an edit, that type of thing. So helping them on that journey has been very fun, and doing that at both large scale organizations, but even smaller organizations who've really invested in what they call a forklift upgrade of their communication infrastructure. And so we have also many organizations that find a great ease of use in how well we're built into the tools that they may have gone all in, whether they're going all in on a Microsoft environment and they're really fully using Teams, making it very easy for them to work with not just Teams and M365 communication tools, but also work with their Purview infrastructure as an example. So
that's fantastic. Well, lots to think about. Final question for you today, Devin. In terms of, we've discussed a lot of stuff today, so thank you so much so far. But just to recap on the big takeaways here for our audience, what would you say they should be thinking about in the year ahead?
Yeah. So I'd say first and foremost, you need to be thinking about compliance infrastructure as an enabler for your UC initiatives. Don't think of it as something that's going to create friction or prevent you from being able to adopt. Really think about it as something that can accelerate the deployment, the engagement in the deployment, and really help your compliance infrastructure and frankly, your compliance team. So that first and foremost. Second, really think about how you're going to help that compliance team navigate all of those new features and functionalities through the lens of a compliance tool like a Theta Lake, to really help them get context around different communications, help them feel like they can actually deal with what is an increasing amount of communication that is happening, and make their lives easier to be able to respond to internal audit or external regulatory audit and response.
Fantastic. Well, Devin, it's been great talking today. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciated the time, and hopefully this was valuable for the audience.
I'm sure it was. And if you're eager to delve deeper into this topic, join us for our forthcoming webinar on Monday, the 11th of December, shortly after Microsoft Ignite 2023. I'll be joined by Theta Lake and Microsoft, and we'll be sharing how you can truly harness the power of Microsoft Teams without compromising on compliance. So I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. Devin, once again, it's been great talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Likewise, thank you.
And thanks to everyone for tuning in. If you've got some good takeaways from today's session, do give us a quick mention on social and subscribe to our channel for more industry news and insights. And don't forget to register for our forthcoming webinar, and there's going to be a link in the description. I'm Rob Scott from UC Today. Thanks for watching.